Hi, welcome to this preview video for Sparta, Struggle for Greece. I'm super excited, double and triple excited to present and play this game and show it to you guys because first of all, I'm Greek. I really like all these war games about ancient Greece and all the history and the fascinating history and battles around this era. This game starts at the Peloponnesian War. This is a war game driven by action cards. It's a very interesting and very different war game. This pits two players, Spartans versus Athenians, Athenians versus Spartans. In either of the two scenarios, you can play either the Peloponnesian War or play the Theban War, and you can also further give them a different starting setup so that you can also have different experiences from each of the different scenarios during setup. So during this game, players go through the various phases of the turn, trying in 6 turns to conquer and control and maintain the most regions in the ancient Greece area. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to expand, remove influence from big city-states and other city-states of your opponents, still influence, and try to put your influence there so that you control them. And it is an interesting thing because each region has a specific number of cities in there. So in order to gain control of a region, you need to have more, I would say, autonomy sum from each of the city contributing to this region. And a big city, megalopolis, has 3 autonomy level, or you can have small cities with 1 autonomy level. So you calculate from those that you control the autonomy value, and if you have higher than your opponent, then you control this region. This is a straight and easy way to understand how control works on these regions, but the game has so much beyond this. It has a very interesting and fascinating card-driven, action card-driven round, which actually has a lot of tension and I would say tug of war between the conflict and the interests of the two sides. The game really thrives on strategy, on hand management, on tactics, on the way that you are able to reply to your opponent's plans or impose your own plans. The game has a very interesting way because you need to have leaders matching your armies in order to be able to deploy them to raid, to gain talents or money essentially, or to siege cities in order to gain control and add them to your, let's say, growing empire. But it's done in a really stepwise manner. So first you need to mobilize, so you pay 3 talents to assign either a leader to an army or a leader to a fleet, and then on the next turn you'll be able to deploy them on the, on the battle map, on ancient Greece essentially. So that means that each player is able to counteract on their opponent's plans as long as they have the correct type of unit at the correct time and the money to do it. And this goes back and forth for 6 rounds until the end of the game, where it's triggered by the 6th round to see who has the most regions under control. Very fascinating gameplay, very tense, very intense in a way of real struggle. I think the title matches like a glove the game. Struggle in terms of trying to always gain a couple of more from your opponents or steal from your opponent, and they're trying to do the same. So this tug of war of control, which is the result of battles and influence on the map, really builds up attention, and together with a clever card play, these action cards are fascinating, delivers an exceptional gaming experience. People who love war games in this, let's say, seen in this ancient Greece, Spartan versus Athens era, they would definitely love this. This is a very interesting and easy flowing game, but with a lot of strategy, a lot of depth and a lot of options and replayability. It also has a solo mode. So join me at the table, I'll show you how the game plays. This is a prototype, keep in mind. The game starts crowdfunding soon, so I'll put the link to the description of the video below so that you can follow up the game. But let me show you how the game plays. Let me teach you everything about Sparta, and we'll come back at the end of this video for a wrap up about the game and my experience with it so far. Sparta, Struggle for Greece, you command either Athenians or Spartans in a battle to rule the Greek world. To achieve dominance, control valuable regions that grant unique benefits, be it the wealth of Sicily, the fleets of Corinth, or alliances with larger cities like Thebes or Syracuse to provide fresh recruits. You might even rally the Persians and Macedonians to your side. Command the conflict, march armies and sortie fleets to raid enemy territories, siege valuable cities and engage your foes in fierce battles. Steel your nerves when you enter the fray of battle, as it bloody and swiftly resolved using an elegant card-based system. Who will head your efforts? Lead your forces with legendary characters such as Pericles and Cleon. Each leader has unique abilities and they may be very useful during combat and other aspects of the game. Combat prowess or cunning in diplomacy, either way, they're both valuable at the correct time. Characters may become experienced by flipping the leader to their upgraded form from the backside with a more powerful ability so that the strength and their usefulness is boosted. So Sparta is essentially a game for 1 to 2 players. It can also be played with a bot as a solo, and it lasts around 2 to 3 hours. In Sparta, 1 to 2 players take control of either Sparta or Athens, as we have said, in a continuous struggle for mastery of the key city-states of the Greek world. Controlling the cities and great towns are the keys to victory. Cities on the map are valued as 1, 2 or 3, as you'll see further on. This shows their size and prosperity and the influence needed in order to control them. Friendly cities will have your placing influence on them. The player with the most cities controlled in each region, shown on the map with different color and icon, will gain the rewards shown in the regional reward box at the start of each turn. That could be either gaining soldiers, talents and diplomatic favor. Regional control can be altered temporarily by raiding or more permanently by sieges. Either requires a leader to command your forces, requiring talents from your mastery, or any other devious plans in order to make it your effort so that you disrupt the plans of your opponent. A trireme can raid or siege harbors anywhere on the map, while a hoplite must be able to march to the target city via road network, some of which may not yet exist at the start of the game, but will become available further on. Each leader has a powerful ability that can be made more dangerous if they become experienced through battle, but battles are not without consequences, as even heroes sometimes may fall. To prevent enemy raids and sieges, you may choose to give battle. The contents of the battle cards in your hand and the military assets you have, such as elites, skirmishers, cavalry and fleets, are always available to you. The game lasts for 6 turns, and at the end of the turn 6, the player with the most regions under their control will be the winner of the game. So, game components. Let's first familiarize ourselves with the component list. We have, of course, the game map, which is a game board indicating Greece and Sicily and various regions around Greece at that time. We have 91 cards, 59 action cards, 24 battle cards and 8 setup start cards. There are also various play raids. There are punch boards with different tokens, rulebook, also some custom dice. Here you can see some generic ones, but again keep in mind that this is a prototype. I'm going to show you all the rules and explain everything you need to know about Sparta, but keep in mind that even though it looks very nice, this is still a prototype, so you'll have, I think, custom dice instead of this generic, which are included in this prototype. Still, they're looking really good. You also have plastic bags, plastic insert to hold the game components in the final production of the game once it gets hopefully funded, and of course 30 wooden discs, 15 red and 15 blue, and also 60 wooden cubes, 30 red and 30 blue. Some of those I have already placed on the map to start with the game setup for the setup of the Peloponnesian War scenario, which I'm going to explain further on. But let's dive a bit more closer into the different components. You can also have, instead of standees, various minis that you can use in the game, either hoplites or triremes, as you can see here. And of course you have lots of different tiles for the different leaders for each of the sides, either Athenians or Spartans. So let's take a closer look. First of all, the game board that you see in front of you. The game board is a representation of the Greek sphere of influence and that of its most influential neighbors at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. Then we have the turn track that you see on the top of the main board. The turn track used depends on the scenario that is being played. On the left, that you see here, you see the Peloponnesian War turn track, and on the right, that you see here, you see the Theban turn track. Of course, as you're playing the Grand Campaign, you'll use first this one and then that one as well. In any case, let's focus on just one section. This is made up of 6 turns, split into 2 eras. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, and each 2 of those consist of an era. First era, second era, and third era. Each is made up of 3 eras. So turns 1 and 2 are respectively the Archidemian War 1, 2, or the Corinthian War for the second scenario. Turns 3 and 4 are the Peace of Nicias or the King's Peace, respectively, for the second scenario. And turns 5 and 6 are the Ionian War or the Theban War, respectively, for the second scenario again. Above the current turn, the names of new leaders entering the game on that turn are shown. And when entering a new era, you add the action cards for that era to the draw deck and you reshuffle it. This is shown on the card decks as a reminder symbol, and I'm going to break down the card decks in a bit. But you do not add the discards back into the deck. For example, if we're playing with a Peloponnesian scenario, you can see already from the second turn belonging to the first era, Brasidas and Demosthenes are the 2 leaders entering respectively from Spartans and Athenians into play, on top of the already available leaders that each side has. Then at the bottom left of the main board you see 2 strength tracks. On top you see the army strength track, and on bottom you see the navy strength track. So the army strength track shows the respective army strengths of the Spartan and the Athenian player, and it also shows the reset spaces for the army strength markers, that they are identified with the labels below. The navy strength track, which is below with the blue color, shows the respective navy strengths of the Spartan and Athenian players, but it also shows ship building costs at certain navy strengths and the talent indicator at the bottom of each space on the track. So for 7 it is 2 talents, for example. On the top left side of the main board we have the asset boxes. We have elites, skirmishers and cavalry, respectively for the Athenian player or the Spartan player. The decorative round space in the middle for each of those different types of units is there for the advantaged player to place a marker, easily showing which player has the advantage. So for example, if the Spartans had the advantage on the elites, they will put their color. If the Athenians had the advantage overall on the skirmishers, but they need to have in their respective asset boxes units to indicate that as well, they will indicate that with their color. Or let's say, for example, the cavalry advantage belongs to the Spartan player and they will indicate that with their color respectively. On the bottom right side of the board we have respectively the battle strength track. The battle strength track is issued and used during land and sea battles to track battle strength. They show at any given time which player is winning the battle at that moment. So for example, let's say Athenians are winning by 2 strength. Once you compare both strengths, the result is tallied, and then that much is on this side if the Athenians are winning, or maybe that side if the Spartans are winning, and that shows who has the battle strength on their side. A region and its regional reward box. Each region is shown in a distinct color, and the cities within a region use the same color as well. Each region also has a distinct icon shown above the regional reward box and above its city for colorblind players. The controller of a region will claim the rewards shown in the associated rewards regional box at the start of each turn. So for example, you see here Attica, this region is in blue, consisted of blue cities. This is a reward bonus, and of course if a player controls this region, we'll see how this is done. They take this on their side to remind them that they're controlling it, and it's also the information printed on the board itself. It's color coded, blue in this case, and has a specific symbol which is also above each of the cities. Each of the cities have different autonomy, so 1 autonomy or 3 autonomy. But for example, let's see Corinth as well. It's yellow, has a different symbol. Here are the rewards for the Corinthian Isthmus region. They're all yellow and have yellow cities as well. An ally space like this, for example. These distinctive spaces represent potential allies. They cannot be attacked, but they can be marched from if the ally supports you. As with regions, the owner earns the rewards printed in the reward box. Again, you can see it below. And it has a reminder on the tile, which is the same. And of course, the player who gained their ally with them by 2 influence in order to control them will take also the tile on their side as well. Again, to remind you that each region has an ally and a control tile indicating the player who controls the region during an assessment phase, if any. The player who controls the region takes the matching tile in front of them, and if the region has become neutral during the last assessment phase, the card or the tile, let's say, is not assigned to any player and it is placed on top of the regional box reward section, so placing it back if you don't control it. So let's see now player mats. Each player has access to their own player mat. The player mat contains different information. Of course, you see that it's different for Athens than it's Sparta. The main difference is, first of all, that the Spartan player has 3 army boxes and 2 fleets, while Athens has 2 army boxes and 3 fleets. To indicate also the asymmetry of that age, where Spartan had more troops, or more elite troops I should say, than Athenians, and Athenians had the better navy than Spartans as well. Let's see how this is broken down. So first of all, you see you have a space here on the left for available, let's say, leaders. So you place their leader tiles from the correct side. This is the inexperienced and this is the experienced side on the ready leaders. So these are the leaders available, and remember that during some turns, like as we have seen before for turn 2 in the Peloponnesian War scenario, Brasidas is being added to the Spartans, for example. This is the space on the left again, where you place leaders on this section to show that they are available. Then you have a space on the right for spent leaders. You place leader tiles there to the right, so leaders spent go on the right, again next to the spent leaders, as shown here, making sure you maintain the correct side if it is experienced or inexperienced based on the course of action. Then the next thing you have is a space for hoplites, triremes and commanders to be placed for each army or fleet space. So you place tiles or miniatures above or below the army or fleet indicator. And again, this could be either tiles and standees or miniatures respectively. So this will be followed up on the crowdfunding page, so you can find more information. But for the demonstration example, let me show you that, let's say we had, in this case, a fleet. We need to have a leader commanding the fleet, so we place it below, and we also have the fleet miniature or token, if you're using tokens. And then of course you could have, let's say, another leader commanding an army, and there you place again miniatures, which are, again, this is prototype, but they already look really nice, and the respective army. Once you are ready to deploy them, immobilizing them essentially. Next, here you have the play sequence as a reminder of all the stages of each of the different rounds. And then you have the treasury, which is at the center, it says treasury, and it has place for your coins and your the money that you have in your disposal. Also, you can have your desperate times marker there, which is a benefit you can use only once through the course of the game. We can explain later on, but also you can keep it with different favor tokens on the treasury box respectively. It also has an iconography with the state income, but on top of this you also add the things from the different areas you control, as we'll see later on. Last but not least, you have an image of your state income as I've said here, and it shows also the rewards you take in addition to the regional analyze that you control. Then we have the cards, which are the action cards, for example, like the one you see here in front of you. Action cards drive the events of the game. Each card associated with a historical era, indicated at the very bottom of the card, with the Peloponnesian War scenario on the left of the card and the Theban War on the right. Some cards do not have any text on the left or right side of the card, and those are not used during the scenario with no era listed. So for example, here you can see that this card can either be used on the Peloponnesian scenario because it's used on the second era, the Peace of Nicias, or also on the Theban War scenario, where they're used during the second and third and fourth step turn of the game for the King's Peace. More on that in a bit. Actually, better to see it now. For example, let me show you that all the cards have either the era on the left from the Peloponnesian War scenario, or the era on the right from the Theban War scenario. So, for example, this card does not have anything on the right. That means it's not used when you're creating the decks for the Theban scenario. But it has an era on the left, so it is used for the Peloponnesian War scenario, and specifically it is used in the Archidemian War, which is for the first two, already included in the first two turns of the game. And again, you can see there are different cards essentially, but also you can see that some cards say remove. When a card says remove, that means that the card is permanently removed from the game after it's been played, but not if it is discarded. And action cards are played during a player's action, of course, round, one per round, and each player will play all the cards in their hand every turn, so no action cards are kept between turns. You also have battle cards. This is the back of a battle card, and this is one battle card example. Battle cards are for use in resolving battles. At all times, players are limited to a maximum of 6 battle cards in their hand, and if they draw more, they must immediately discard down to 6 of their choice. Battle cards can be held from one turn to the next, and battle cards are only playable during a battle. At the start of each turn, you shuffle all the discarded battle cards back into the main deck, and you create a battle card deck again. You also have different setup cards. This is the back of the setup cards of the Peloponnesian War. You have 4, and this is the back of the setup card for the Theban War, which is again 4. These are 4 setup cards for each scenario, and during setup you can select one, draw one randomly, or use a recommended card, and each one changes the game and gives you a different starting point. For example, let's see this setup for the Peloponnesian War. It has some steps that it is recommended first of all setup card, so it's better to use this for your first game if you're playing the Peloponnesian War, and it has some introduction on the game, and also has some different things that each of the different sides has to do, usually placing some influence on the main board additional. Then you have the leader tiles. The game contains named leader tiles listing each leader's special ability, and an additional 6 unnamed generic leaders: Strategos, Navarch and Polemarch. These are the generic ones that they are used for each player. So this is the named one, and this is 2 of the generic ones, for example. And keep in mind that each leader tile has 2 sides, one regular and one experienced. The experienced side has a more powerful leader ability, and also it has a yellow box at the background to indicate that it is leader. Of course, you can also see from the art that they're more battle hardened and experienced from the experience side. Then we have different markers. We have first of all the influence cubes and the influence discs. The cubes are used in order to indicate the accumulated influence. So for example, here is 1 out of 2. This city-state needs 2 cubes. So when you place the second cube, you have as needed in order to match the autonomy of the city, and then you replace it once you have 2 cubes there with a disc to indicate that you also control it. So for example, I do not control Elis, or I do not control, for example, Thebes over here because I have a cube, 1 out of the 3. But here, since I already had, let's say, 3 cubes, it needs 3 cubes since it has 3 symbols. We're going to explain those later on. I'm talking about Sparta in specific. I have removed the cubes and added a disc to indicate I also control it. I do not control it, it's friendly to me. I do control it, with my influence. You also have army strength, 1 per player, indicating the army strength on the army strength track, and navy strength marker to indicate the navy strength respectively on the bottom left tracks of the board. You also have raided or sieged markers that you can use if you're raiding or if you're sieging a city, and these are used frequently in the game. You have Hoplites and Triremes in the different sides, blue and red, blue for Athenians, red for Spartans. These can be either miniatures for each player, 2 Hoplites and 3 Triremes for Athens, and 3 Hoplites and 2 Triremes for Sparta, or tokens as you see next to them. For example, these are the tokens, or the tokens that you can use to withstand these. The number corresponds to the army of the fleet number, or the fleet number for identification. So on the tokens you have different numbers that they match the different army or fleet boxes on your player mat, but also there are some differences. For example, the number of sails that you have. 1 sail means level 1, 2 sails means level 2, and no sails means level 3, for example, for the fleets of the Athenians. That the same goes for different markings for the Hoplites, so you can distinguish them for which army box or fleet box they correspond to. Talents in denominations of 1 and 3 respectively, as well as the desperate times marker, which is this one, and it can be used only once per game from each player, and each player has one as well. Last but not least, we have favor in variety of shapes and colors. You have green, gods and men. Discuss favor in competition among mortals. Athena, favor of gods overall. Yellow, riches and leisure, which is cornucopia, favor of wealth, or harp, favor of leisure or artistic ability. Red, health and love. Rod of Asclepius for health, and Heracles not for love. These are the different favors that you can see here and have the respective tiles, but also you have the different military assets. Let me show you a couple. We have seen them already on the asset box reward section. These are, for example, the tokens, the circular tokens you see here. These are regular on the silver side, or white side I should say, and actually it's silver background, or elite experienced on the gold side. So you have either the regular side or the experienced side on the gold color. And these again are split between cavalry, elites, and of course fleets respectively. Should say now that the silver side counts for 1 when you're calculating the advantage for the elites, the skirmishers or the cavalry, while the gold one counts for 2 respectively. Finally, we have some additional tokens like the Megalopolis, the Helot Uprising, different colony tokens that they go on the gray faded spaces on the respective section, for example, matching the destination and the color, of course, but these are colonies to be founded. If they're not founded yet, they're not placed on the board, or you can have different tokens like these, which are tokens that come into gameplay from different card effects, as well as some additional small tokens. These make up all of the components of the game together with the dice. Leaders. Leaders are either ready, spent, or commanding an army or a fleet respectively, depending on the location on the player board. They're commanding an hoplite if they are on the army boxes, or a fleet if they are on the fleet boxes on the play mat. Then if they are ready, they are placed to the left of your playmat, and these are available to you. If they're spent, they're placed on the right of the playmat, which they cannot be used for this turn. Again, if they're commanding in a hoplite or fleet space and placed above or below the mat for the corresponding space, make sure they match the corresponding number of the fleet or the army number respectively. After the start of each turn, a faction's leaders are all ready except for those still involved in a siege. They are still commanding. A ready player can lead an hoplite or trireme, and some leaders become spent by using their unique ability. A spent leader can do nothing until the next turn. If a leader becomes experienced, the leader tile is flipped to the experienced side, indicating that they are experienced and they have a better, more upgraded ability. Each player has 3 generic leaders, Strategos, Navarch and Polemarch, and these generic leaders on the regular side are not named leaders, Generic leaders who become experienced are named leaders in terms of actions and keywords in the cards and how we exploit them. Anytime a generic leader is killed, instead of being removed from the game, they are placed with a regular side on the next turn. But named leaders who are killed are removed from the game permanently. And leader abilities only apply while that leader is taking part in its respective activity, of course. Hoplites and Triremes. Triremes and Hoplites are either available, like those three, to be mobilized on an army box or a fleet box, but not yet deployed on the map, or already deployed on the map. An Hoplite or Trireme on the player mat can be mobilized by paying 3 talents, and they can be, of course, in this way mobilized once you pay. And then you're placing you have to also place a ready leader on the player mat in the correct space for that force, ready for it to be deployed. So this is mobilized. I have already played 3 talents for mobilizing this Hoplite, and I have assigned a leader to it, and I have done the same. I have already paid 3 talents to mobilize a fleet, assigning a leader, paying for mobilize, and these 2 are of course ready for me to be mobilized, to be deployed. They're already mobilized to be deployed on the map. A mobilized Trireme or Hoplite can be deployed, that means placed, onto the board in order to fight an enemy or conduct a raid. If a raid is successful, a force may convert into a siege or return home. We'll see that later on. And once an Hoplite or Trireme has fought or completed its siege or raid, it is removed from the map and placed back into the player mat, next to it, actually, for your supply. It is ready to be used again. The leader goes, though, to the spent side if it was commanding a fleet or an army during this military action. Very, very important. An Hoplite or Trireme can only be deployed if they have a leader in command. If a commander is removed from their command section, or a Trireme or a Hoplite which is not about to return home, he must be replaced by another leader selected from the owning player's available ready box. If there are none with a leader, you take one from the spent box. But keep in mind that in order to be able to deploy them, they need to be accompanied by a commanding leader. 1 force per space, except during battles, only one Hoplite or Trireme can ever be in the same space. Talking about spaces. Spaces, influence and regions. Map spaces. The map is composed of spaces, each representing a city or an allied nation. Each space has an autonomy value from 1 to 3. 1, 2, or 3. The shape of the space and the number of the icons above the space indicate the value of each space. Each space can hold as many influence points as its autonomy value and no more. And when a space has influence points equal to its autonomy value, it is then controlled by that player, thus removing the cubes and replacing it with a disc of your color. The soldier symbol beneath a 3-value city, like Sparta, reminds the players that these cities each give a bonus when resetting army strength. Influence. Only one player may have influence in a space. If a player places influence in a space that already contains enemy influence, the enemy influence is first removed on a one-to-one basis. And when a space holds influence equal to its autonomy value, it is controlled by that player, like here, for example. A control space would be marked with a larger influence disc to quickly and easily show who has control. Sparta is under control of Spartans, while, for example, Corinth is allied, friendly. It's friendly with 1 influence, but still it needs 2 more cubes, as you may not see now, but let me remove it. It has 3 triangles in order to fully control it and replace it with a disc. So again, when a space holds less or equal influence than its autonomy value, it is friendly to the player with the influence and hostile to the player without influence. You use smaller influence cubes in order to mark a space which is not yet controlled to make it easy to tell the board state. A space with no influence of either player is neutral to both players. Raids and sieges contested. Any space containing a raided or sieged marker is considered contested. Contested spaces are never controlled by anyone, no matter how much influence you see present on them. Regions. Each city space within a region shows the color of the region it belongs to. The owner of a region is a player with the highest total autonomy value of controlled spaces within the region of that time of the calculation. If tied, neither player owns the region. So for example, here Attica is controlled by a total value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values, because you see each of those is controlled and it counts towards the total. If this wasn't controlled, if it was for example like that, then the number for calculating how much autonomy value they have would be 1, 2, 3, 4 versus of course the other player if they also have areas that they control within this region. Whoever has the highest autonomy value among control spaces within that region is the one who controls this region. Again, if neither player has this number, then no one controls this region. Why it is important to control regions, you ask? Of course, at the start of each turn, the owner of a region will earn the rewards printed on that region's regional reward box, and there is a reminder also that you see it comes on the tile, but also you see them printed on the reward box. So this player would gain 3 talents for controlling Attica, and of course during taking control they would also take this asset to be available to them for cavalry specifically, which actually in the setup of the Peloponnesian War this is the case because they control Attica and they do have that asset. Overall there are 11 regions that can be found on the map. We have Aetolian and Ionian Isles, Attica, Boeotia, Halcidice, Corinthian Isthmus, Cyclades, Hellespont, Ionian coast of Asia, Peloponnesus, Sicily, and last Thessaly. There are different land connections. If you take a closer look on the map, spaces connected to each other via land connections are adjacent. This matters for marching armies and supplying a siege. And note that the colony space, which does not yet exist, does not have any connecting roads. They do not exist. These roads marked on the map in a distinct color. For example, here you have a different color indicating that. If you're going to place this colony or that colony, of course, from the colonies, as you see there. But also keep in mind that the rest, you have distinct roads. For example, from Epidaurus, I can go to Corinth via this road, and you can see it here. But these roads have another color because this colony has not been yet founded, so it does not exist. So this road connecting to Larion, or this road connecting to Athens, or this one, they do not yet exist. But the gray ones, they do already exist. The green ones only exist if you have the colony on the board. Again, if you take a closer look, you can see that there are some harbor icons with the anchor in a blue square, indicating the harbors on the different city-states. Not every city-state has a harbor. For example, you do not have a harbor on Sparta, but you do have one in Kythera because it has a respective harbor icon. Athens has a harbor, of course. Spaces containing an anchor sign are harbors, and harbor spaces can be moved to by a fleet. A space without an anchor cannot be moved to by a fleet. Allies. There are 5 ally spaces on the board. You have Macedon, which is this one. You have Crete over here. You have Persia over there. You have Thrace over there. And you have Megali Hellas over there, which translates for big Greece. Like with the regions, each ally also has a reward box that you see there. And each ally gives the reward box to the player controlling the tile. As with regions, the controlling player will earn the rewards printed at the start of the turn. Colonies, there are 4 spaces on the map: Rhium, Heraclea, Dicilia, and Pylos. For colonies, they do not have regular spaces, but instead have an image of a field. These spaces and the land connecting to them do not exist unless marked on the space map with an overlaid tie. So for example, if I'm going to place Pylos, I would place it here. It is a harbor, and once that's done, you can connect with this road. Before that, before putting the colony on the board, this space is not part of the game board, or actually it does not work. Now, let's see the game sequence. The phasing player is a player who is currently playing a card. There are no cards remaining in the action card draw pile. When this happens, or battle card draw pile, the player draws a card first, reshuffles and discards to form a new draw pile. In addition to the start of every turn, you shuffle the battle card discards back into the battle card deck. So the turn sequence. A turn in Sparta has a following sequence. First you have the regional assessment. Then you have the hoplite reset, which is skipped for turn 1. Then you have shipbuilding, which is again skipped for turn 1. Then you have recruitment, also skipped for turn 1. Then you have rebuilding, also skipped for turn 1. And finally you have deal action cards, also skipped during turn 1 because you already start the game with the action cards. Then you have the action rounds, which is 6 rounds. And then you have the Olympic Games. Finally, you have the victory phase, which is at the end of the turn 6 only. Now, let's see a couple of words about each of the different steps in the sequence of a turn. I remind you that you can find a play sequence aid printed on your player board, respectively. So, let's start with the regional assessment, which is the first thing that we do. Players check each region and ally to determine control. Regional and ally control tiles are distributed to the controlling player. Then each player collects the rewards listed on the regional and ally control tiles and on their player mat as state income. If the reward is an asset, put it in the correct asset box without flipping it. Or return it to the control card if that region has become uncontrolled. If the reward is a number of talents or favor, the player takes that amount and puts it into their treasury. Each player also receives 3 talents as the state income. Thebes receives a talent card and Athens a favor. This is printed on your player mat as a reminder and can never be lost. So let's say, for example, that at this stage I would be the one controlling Attica. That means I would take this tile, I would take these 3 additional talents, add it to my 3 state income talents that I have on my player board for Athens, and then I would take the asset and without flipping it, because this is elite and counts for 2, I would place it into the corresponding asset box over there, showing that I have 1 asset. And in this case, let's say that for cavalry, and in this case, let's say that after this step the Spartan player has no cavalry. That means that I will gain the advantage on the cavalry, and I can easily indicate this by placing on discs to show quickly and without wasting too much time who has the advantage. The same goes for skirmishers and elites. Second step is the hoplite reset, as you see on your play sequence 8 on your player board, playmat. Then for this step each player sets their position of their army strength marker. So you have 5 for the player who has the lower army strength, or both players if tied, or 4 if a player has 0 army strength. And these are indicated here. You also have 6 for the player with the highest army strength. So let's say that was here, that player has the highest army strength, they would go to 6. If that player was here, had the lowest, they would go to 5. If that player had 0, they would reset to 4. So this is very easy to remember, and this is how you set it up at this stage. Then, after altering the position on each marker, you go with -1 for each ongoing friendly siege, a siege by a friendly hoplite at an enemy city, and +1 for each uncontested, freely controlled megalopolis, which is a 3-size city. Not raided, not under siege, and with 3 of your influence markers on it. So let's say, for example, the Spartan player has 2 megalopolis, 3 city sizes, 3-size cities with control on them, which is also not under siege, not raided, and with 3 of your influence markers, a disc essentially on it. That means that they would gain 1 and 1, 2 for each of those. And let's say they also have 1 ongoing friendly siege, meaning an hoplite at an enemy at their city, so they go there. Then, next step is shipbuilding, as you see here. For this step, both players may spend talents on shipbuilding in order to increase their navy strength. To do so, the player spends talents equal to the number in the box beneath their current navy strength and then increases their navy strength by 1. So the Athenian would spend 2 talents and then they would go to 7, for example. If one player has a lower navy strength, that player may increase strength, then the other player may do so, and finally the player with the lower strength, if still lower, may increase strength again. If players are tied in navy strength, the Athenian player may increase strength once, followed by the Spartan player. Next step is recruitment. Both players may spend talents on recruitment in order to rebuild eliminated military assets belonging to a region or ally they control. Each player may take any number of recruitment actions by taking turns doing so, with the Spartan player going first, and once player passes they may no longer take recruitment actions this turn. To take a recruitment action, simply spend 1 talent from your treasury and return the eliminate asset to the asset box. If you also control it, then you put it in the respective section here. Actually, you will do it when you control it because that's your asset, and then you will place the military asset here in order to trying to gain the advantage in cavalry, for example. Players never rebuild mercenary assets in this way, only via play of battle cards, for example. Next step is rebuilding. Remove all raided markers from the map except from a space which is still under siege. Raids last only for a single turn. If you want to deny control, you have to keep raiding, so raid markers are removed. So if you want to continue denying control for a region from a player, you have to continue keep raiding. Next step is to deal 6 action cards. So you draw and you deal 6 action cards to each player. Both players will draw 6 cards with the cards being dealt alternately. Sparta receiving the first card, then going to Athens, then Sparta, then Athens, up to the point that each has 6 cards in their hand. And then you have the action rounds, 6 rounds in total. So each action round follows the same pattern. First, resolve raids by your own Hoplites and Triremes that are already on the map and are not sieging a space. Either raid and return home or raid and start a siege. Leaders returning home are spent. Second, play an action card if you have one. Ignore this step if you do not. Alternatively, spend 2 favor to discard an action card instead of playing it. Third, deploy mobilized Hoplites and Triremes from your deploy area, from your player board, play mat, into the board. Fourth, mobilize new Hoplites and Triremes. This is a step actually that you place them from your player mat to the player board. The mobilization is just spending 3 talents in order to place them in the army box. This is done in the mobilize step 4 for armies or Triremes fleets. The 4th step is to mobilize new Hoplites and Triremes and play them on the board on the different areas you want to mobilize them. Then you prosecute sieges, which is step 5, and then you have step 6, which is battles. The facing player chooses which battle to fight until all have been resolved. So, reminding, resolve raids, then play an action card if you have one, then deploy mobilize Hoplites and Triremes, then mobilize new Hoplites, so you get ready for the next round in order to have available mobilize so that you can deploy them on the next round. Then you prosecute sieges, and then you conclude with proceed with battles, and the facing player chooses the order for the battles to be fought, the sequence. When neither player has a card remaining, the current round is completed and proceed to the Olympics. What is the Olympics? The Olympics, of course, is the last step of the play sequence after the action rounds have been played. And it is again reminded on the playmat for the players. At the end of each turn, the Olympic Games are held. Further aggression will breach the religious truce held across Greece, so the participants can journey to the attended games. When neither player has any cards left and the round has ended, both players check to see if they have Hoplites or Triremes on the map which have not yet raided or begun a siege. If they do, either they immediately remove them or roll a die for each. Failure, which in this, for the custom dice, you'll have failure, blank and success faces, but in this prototype, on the dice, a value of 1 is a failure, then a value of 2 or 3 is a blank, no effect, and a value 4, 5 or 6 is a success. So 50% of the die results in a success. So going back to the roll, if you have a failure, the Hoplite or Trireme is removed from the map and its leader is permanently eliminated. If you have a blank, the Hoplite or Trireme is removed from the map and its leader moved to the spent. That means that they get to be used again on the next turn. And if it is a success, 4, 5 or 6, then you continue the deployment as either a raid or a siege as normal. Then, both players check to see if they have any leaders commanding armies or triremes that have not yet been deployed to the map. Those armies will not get a chance to act. Those leaders are placed into the spent leader area of the player map. Once all Hoplites and Triremes have completed their activities, the Olympics will be held. Both players will roll 2 dice. Each player who breached the truce by rolling a dice for an Hoplite or Trireme, as above, rolls 1 fewer die, and each player who removed an Hoplite or Trireme from the map without rolling, or who spent a leader who had not deployed, rolls 1 additional die. And the player with the most successes results wins. If tied, the player with the less control region wins. SPARTA if still tied. The winner chooses to gain 1 talent or 1 favor. The loser gains the reward not chosen by the winner. The turn marker is advanced to the next turn, meaning going to the next turn here. And you receive any newly arriving leaders indicated above. Second turn, Brasidas for Spartan and Demosthenes for Athenians. All leaders are moved from the spent to the ready, so from the spent side on the right to the ready side on the left, so they are available for players to use again. And we proceed with the next round. So we only have the victory phase, which is turn 6 only. If it is the end of the turn 6, so if we finish turn 6 here in the Peloponnesian or here in the Theban War scenario, then we have the victory phase check. The player controlling the most regions wins the game. Allies are not counted and are ignored for this purpose. So only regions that they are controlled by players are counted, and the player who has the most regions controlled by them wins the game. Allies controlled, they do not offer into the total number that you need in order to win the game, meaning that you have more than your opponent. Now, a word about card play. You see, we have different cards, and of course they play a tremendous role into the game flow. It's really important when you use which action cards again. But if a player can discard a card by card play, the event on the discarded card is not implemented. Maybe you don't want the event to happen, that's why you have to try to avoid it. A player may also discard a card by spending 2 favor, in this case discarding the card instead of playing the card. Otherwise you have to play all 6 cards, altering between you and your opponent. Several cards are removed from the game once played instead of being placed into the discards, and if you have to remove a card, remember that it has the remove icon or tag clearly. And any card that contradicts the written rules, of course, supersedes the written rules. So this is the core of the game. Again, talking about cards, let's see a word about envoys. Main cards and other effects allow player to send a lesser or greater envoy to a space or ally. Envoys allow a player to place or increase their influence on a space and or reduce or eliminate the opponent's influence. A lesser envoy places or removes 1 influence, a greater envoy places or removes 2 influence, or removes 1 then places 1 in a single space or ally. It is important that unless allowed by the card, envoys cannot be sent to contested spaces that have been raided or that are under siege. Only other scenarios are options are available to the player, but not for sieged or contested areas in general. Whenever a player may send one or more envoys, they may choose to send one of those envoys to their uncontested, not raided, not under siege capital instead, if friendly or neutral. And to do this, your capital can be under siege, raided, or contain an enemy influence. And the capital city Sparta is always it's always the capital belonging to the Spartan player. The Athenian player capital is Athens during the Peloponnesian War scenario, which is this one, or Thebes during the Theban War, which is the second scenario. Now let's focus on the military actions. During each player's action round, that player may spend talents to prepare Hoplites and Triremes for military action. Some cards also give free Hoplites or Triremes to a player. Mobilize an Hoplite or Trireme. By spending 3 talents means 3 coins, a player may move a ready leader to the commander section of an Hoplite or Trireme on the player mat, and this Hoplite or Trireme is then considered to be mobilized, and the leader becomes the commander of this area. So for example, again, I spend 3 talents, and then I can mobilize one of my leaders by sending them above the respective army box or fleet box if they are respectively commanding an army or a navy. And then this leader is considered mobilized, and at the time of the mobilization, the player may pay an additional 2 talents in order to draw a battle card. Any number of Hoplites and Triremes may become mobilized at the same time, meaning that you have them available, not already mobilized or not deployed on the map. You have them available, and then you can mobilize them, meaning assigning them to this leader in the army box. So now you can have them commanded by the leader that you have assigned. If a player has no ready leaders, they cannot perform this action. You need a ready leader to mobilize. A mobilized Hoplite or Trireme will deploy and be placed on the map on the following round. So plan ahead. You have to mobilize this turn, fleet, armies and fleets, and on the next turn you will be able to deploy them on the board. Then keep in mind that you have the Desperate Times marker, which is this one. I'm just showing it to you again. Each player has one Desperate Times marker, and this can be discarded during your turn to mobilize one Hoplite or Trireme at no cost in talents, and then immediately deploy to fight an enemy force. Okay, what about demobilization? Once an Hoplite or Trireme completes its military action, we'll see later on, by raiding, fighting a battle, completing a siege, or disbanding before the Olympics, it is returned to the player mat, and its leader is placed in the spent box. So once they have completed their military action, it is again available next to your player mat, and the leader is spent and put next to the spent leader box, as you see there. If an Hoplite or Trireme does not deploy when able to do so, it is demobilized, but the leader may return ready instead of spent. You still lose a talent spent to mobilize though. So if, for example, I was preparing to do something this turn and I mobilized this army, let me put it so that you can see it like that. I mobilize this army. If I decide not to deploy them on the next turn, which I have to, then that means that this leader is not spent. I can use it, so I place him on the right of my playmat because it's ready again, and the miniature, of course, if it still becomes available. But I do not take back the 3 talents spent in order to mobilize that I mobilized in the previous round. These are lost. Okay, so now let's see deploying a Hoplite or Trireme. Again, focusing on Hoplites, but let's put this there. And let's see, I have already mobilized the Strategos with paying 3 talents, and he's there, Army 1, with assigned the Hoplite miniature. So the round after an Hoplite or Trireme is mobilized by paying 3 talents, I have done this. The round after that, then it can either be deployed on the map or demobilized. When deploying to the map, there are 3 possible outcomes. Deployed to a raid space, a space that has a raid icon. For example, let's say that this city here was raided, so I can deploy it on a raided space. I can either deploy it to a raid space and then begin a siege after raiding. So I can either deploy it there if I was raiding, or I can deploy it to a raiding space and then begin a siege after deploying, or deploy it to fight an enemy hoplite or trireme already on the map. So let's say here I would be able to deploy it in order to fight this hoplite here. Essentially, it's a way to respond defensively to an attacker's plans. So, when deploying an hoplite, the target space must either be neutral, no influence from anyone, or hostile, meaning enemy influence. I cannot deploy into my own cities. I can deploy, unless I'm fighting, I'll explain later. So when deploying, I can either deploy to neutral spaces, neutral cities, or with no influence, or a hostile one with enemy influence. For example, this city here has influence from the Athenians. I can deploy here respectively. You must be able to trace a path along roads starting at one of your friendly but not necessarily controlled capital city, a controlled three-value city, megalopolis, a controlled ally, a controlled colony, or a space with a friendly hoplite currently sieging but not one that is raiding. So in this case I can deploy from this road, because I'm controlling the city, all the way here and respond and go to this Athenian Anactorian city, because I'm drawing a road from a city which is friendly, not necessarily controlled. It could be that okay, here it's only one to control, but let's say I had cubes instead of discs, meaning I have friendly but not controlling cities. Still I would be able to trace an attack via road towards them. The path must pass through neutral, no influence, friendly, or contested, raided, or under siege spaces with no enemy hoplites or triremes present. When deploying a trireme, you select a neutral or hostile harbor space anywhere on the map, and if the target space is eligible, you place your hoplite or trireme in the selected space. If deploying to fight an enemy hoplite or trireme, an enemy hoplite must be fought by your own hoplite, triggering a land battle. An enemy trireme must be fought by your own trireme, triggering a sea battle. There are no restrictions. Your force can march or sail anywhere on the map. No path is required and no starting space is required. This is for deploying to fight an enemy hoplite or trireme. You only need the right type of unit ready at the right time, meaning that you have already mobilized them. Raiding. A deployed hoplite or trireme will raid the unraided space it occupies in the round after it has been deployed, unless it is attacked, stopped by the defender, and removed by an enemy force before that. To perform a raid, it is not already, if not already, meaning that if it does not already has a raid marker, add influence to the space so that it becomes controlled by the enemy player. Then the raiding player takes one talent and adds it to the treasury and places a raid marker on the space. So you take one talent, you place a raiding marker, but of course you give enough influence from the opponent so that they control it if they do not do it already. A raided space is contested and no longer counts as controlled until the raided marker is removed, meaning this one. Or begins a siege. If the raid was conducted by trireme, replace the trireme with an available hoplite model and transfer the leader to the correct place on the play mat. If there is no available hoplite, a siege cannot be started. So, if the raid was conducted by trireme here in Anactorion, because it has a harbor, as you can see, then I replace the trireme with an available hoplite model and transfer the leader from the fleet to the army box respectively, so that they can begin the siege. Important, if there is no available hoplite mini or standee, a siege cannot be started. In this round and all following rounds, the hoplite may conduct one prosecute siege role. So, talking about sieges now, how siege is performed. To prosecute the siege, spend 2 talents and choose a siege with a friendly hoplite. So let's say now I am sieging this city. So I spend 2 talents and I choose a city which is sieged with an hoplite of my color. Each siege can be chosen once per round, including the round that the siege begins. You roll dice, as we'll explain now, reducing your army strength track once if at least 1 failure is rolled, and reducing enemy influence in the space by 1 for each of the successes you roll. A blank result has no effect. You roll 1 die and add 1 die if more adjacent, uncontested, not raided, not siege, friendly controlled spaces and allies than uncontested hostile controlled spaces and allies, so if you have more than the opponent. You also get 1 more die if besieging the Sparta space. You also get 1 more die if the army strength or navy strength track provides you with an extra die, as indicated at the end of their track respectively. And you lose 1 die if besieging the Athens space. Important, you will now roll between 0 and 3 dice at most, never more than that. The result can be either a successful siege or you can abandon a siege respectively. Successful siege. When the besieging player removes the final influence cube from the besieged space, the siege is won. The besieging player gains talent equal to the space autonomy, means the spots, the dots of the symbol, in this case 2, in this case 1. So I gain respective talents according to the city's autonomy, returns the besieging hoplite to the playmat, returns the commander to the spent box and places a control disk on the space, assuming control of the city. You can also abandon a siege after making a prosecute siege action. The facing player may end the siege by rolling 1 die, eliminating the besieging leader if the roll is a failure, and also placing a raid marker back onto the space to indicate that the siege has been abandoned. You return again the leader, if not eliminated, to the spent box and return the besieging hoplite to the starting player mat. You also have diplomacy. If a space becomes friendly to the besieging player during a siege, immediately end the siege, and the besieger does not gain any talents in this way, you just remove the army and return the leader spent. Battles. An enemy hoplite must be fought by your own hoplites, triggering a land battle, and an enemy trireme must be fought by your own triremes, triggering a sea battle. Battles are fought in order, selected by the facing player always. Now, land battles. Both players start by calculating their battle strength. +1 for the side with the largest combined value in the elite box, the elite advantage. +1 for the side with the largest combined value in the cavalry box, the cavalry advantage. +1 for the side with the largest combined value in the skirmisher box, the skirmisher advantage. +1 for the side higher on the army strength track, the larger force advantage. +1 for the player holding the control tile of the battle region, the home ground advantage. The player with the higher strength marks the difference on the battle display to show which side is winning the fight at present. So let's say after calculating all these modifiers, let's say Spartans have the advantage by 2, let's say 4 minus 2, they give them 2 in total, so they mark the +2 they have here. If it was 4 minus 1, they would gain 3, for example. So, at present, Spartan is winning. Battle cards. The player with 0, 1 or 2 battle cards in their hand, these are the battle cards, I remind you, they draw a battle card at the start of the battle. This has no cost. The attacker has the first opportunity to play a battle card. Several battle cards call for an asset to be reduced. A veteran asset is reduced to regular, a regular asset is eliminated if already reduced, and likewise some cards promote an asset, improving the regular asset to a veteran. Again, this is veteran, this is regular, and this is an example of an asset. Now, also some cards can grant new assets. Whenever assets change during a battle, recheck the advantage for the asset type that's changed. That means that the advantage on the top board may change depending on the flip or reduction or improvement of an asset. So, a battle card which cancels an advantage also reduces the battle strength of the player who had that advantage. The advantage cannot be counted during the battle at all by either player. Battle cards can only be played during a battle. They cannot be played at any other stage. Also note that many battle cards have sea and land effects. They can only be played for the matching effect of that type of battle. So you cannot play the effect of sea from the battle card on a land battle with armies. Players continue playing battle cards until both players pass consecutively. Once both players pass consecutively, the side with the highest battle strength is victorious. If both sides are tied, the battle is draw and neither side is victorious. The leader fate. Both players must roll for their leaders. The owning player rolls a die to determine the fate of the leader. Success. A leader becomes experienced. Flip it to the gold side, which is experienced with more boosted ability. And if it was already experienced from before, the owning player draws a battle card. Failure. The named leader is permanently eliminated and removed from the game. Note that the generic leaders they return to the game on the regular side, so you always have the generic leaders in your hand available, but they return on the regular side next turn. Again, place them into the spent leaders. What are the battle consequences? The player with a higher battle strength wins the battle. The victorious player reduces the army strength marker by 1. The defeated player reduces their army strength marker by 2. So -1 for the winner, -2 for the loser. Additionally, the victorious player gains 1 favor. If the victorious player wins by 3 strength points difference or more, or as well as gaining a favor, also reduce 1 opposing enemy asset of the victor's choice which participated, allied fleets in a sea battle, land assets in a land battle, etc. If the battle strength ends on 0, the battle has a draw and both players reduce their army strength marker by 1. Then you return all leaders involved in the battle to their spent box and all hoplites to the player mat. If the battle space was under siege and the sieging player did not lose a battle, that is, they drew or won, they do not return home, they continue their siege. If the sieging player did lose, mark the space with a red marker if not already marked. Sea battles. Sea battles are fought exactly as per land battles, except for the strength calculation, and that losses are suffered on the navy strength track respectively, not on the army strength track, of course. Both players start by calculating battle strength, +1 for the side with the largest combined value in the allied fleet box, the allied fleet advantage, and they have their disc here to denote it, +1 for the side with the higher on the navy strength track, the larger force advantage, and +1 for the player holding the control tile of the battle region, the home ground advantage. The player with a higher strength marks the difference on the battle display to show which side is winning, and of course you follow the same sequence like with battle on land. You play battle cards and then you resolve them respectively. Last but not least, keep in mind that setup, prior to setup you decide which scenario you play, whether you're playing the Peloponnesian War or the Theban War. You sort the cards into separate decks looking at the bottom of the cards, and if playing the Peloponnesian War, use the left of the card. If playing the Theban War, use the right of the card. The map shows which deck to use on the turn track, and then to add in the new cards from the second and third decks, and then adding new cards, do not add the discards, only the new cards indicated from the era when you move there. And of course there is a mini setup for an easy mini setup for the different scenarios, meaning that for example the Peloponnesian War, which is recommended, all battle cards are shuffled together into one deck. The action cards are split into 3 decks based on the word and color of the bottom left of each card. You shuffle each card from the Archidemian deck to form the initial play deck and deal 6 to each player. Then you place the turn marker on turn 1 space of the Peloponnesian War track on the left, as I have done here during setup. Then you give each player their desperate times marker. Now they have one of those. You give each player, of course, their player mat and leaders. You place all regional and allied control tiles on the map in their holding boxes. You place all matching military assets on their respective control tiles, all on the regular sides. Athens army strength starts on 4, and Spartan army strength starts on 6, and the other way around, navy for the Spartans starts at 4, and navy for the Athenians starts at 6 strength. Then Athens setup, all leaders are inexperienced, all leaders not mentioned are not in play, or remaining hoplites and triremes are placed on the player mat ready to be mobilized if you pay 3 talents. You have Pericles, a ready leader, Cleon, a ready leader, Athenian Polemarch, a ready leader, Athenian Strategos commanding army 1, Athenian Navar commanding fleet 1, Army 1 at Potidaia, sieging, which is over here actually. So they're sieging. And then you have a Fleet 1 mobilized on your player mat. You have also influence put on 3 Athenian influence on Athens. Already done it, that's why I have a disc, 3 out of 3. 1 in Lorion, 1 in Evia, 1 in Naxos, 1 in Chios, 1 in Lesbos, 1 in Actorion, and 1 in Byzantium. I also need to place 1 on Naxos, which actually gives me control as well. Sparta setup. All leaders are inexperienced, all leaders not mentioned are not in play, or remaining Hoplites and Triremes are placed next to the board to play mat. You have a Plistoanax, which is already a leader, Spartan Strategos, which is already leader, Spartan Navar, which is already leader, Spartan Polemarch, which is already leader, and Archidemus, which is a commanding Army 1. You also have Army 1 mobilized, and then you put 3 Spartan influence, 3 influence on Sparta, you control it, 2 influence on Potidaia, you also control it, this is where the sieging happens, at setup. 1 Elis, 1 Mantinea, 1 Corinth, 1 Thebes, 1 Delphi, and 1 Abrasia. You also have the Spartan Elite. So you have this asset which starts on the Elite side, indicating that you of course have the advantage for the Elites, at least at the beginning of the game. Players choose or randomly draw a setup card from the corresponding Peloponnesian card deck or Theban War deck, and you see the background and you see some additional influence that you place based on the instructions of the card respectively, so that you can also further differentiate your Peloponnesian War experience. Once complete, you start with the regional assessment and you start the game. And there you have it. This is everything you need to know on how to play Sparta, Struggle for Greece. Wow, extremely satisfying experience. I love war games that they build on strategy, they build on plans, but also feel fresh and feel tense and give you a lot of opportunities. This game really has, I don't know, a strategy all over written on it, because it delivers this in-depth approach to war games via action cards, because it has in each turn you have 6 action cards that you can play, and different things can happen, and then you can spark battles on different areas. You can try to cleverly outmaneuver your opponent by mobilizing at the correct time when they cannot counteract and reply back to you. And this is really important in this game. Timing is really important. So it looks and feels like I don't know, a board game experience, a war game experience of chess, I would say, because each step has to be acted by your opponent, and you have to see where your opponent has weaknesses and take and exploit them in terms of area control, in terms of economy and treasury, in terms of leaders, available leaders, because they only have a specific amount of available leaders, and once they deploy them and mobilize them, then they are spent usually, so that you cannot use them again. So this chase back and forth, this tug of war, I would say, is fascinating. I think it really shines and delivers an excellent gaming experience. Gamers and players who love strong, sharp, clever and thinky, but not burned out strategic war games, they would love that. It has a lot of depth, it has a lot of replayability, it has a lot of value. I like the fact that you can play with either the Peloponnesian War scenario or the Theban War scenario, and there are different action cards used, some they are common, but there are different action cards used in each of those. The area deployment and the sieging and raiding is really important. Expanding is always important. The allies are fascinating because you have some allies that you try to take control of them because they give you more income, they give you more benefits, and the game itself really shines on I don't want to call it modifiers, but it's done in a really elegant and slick way, because from your controlled areas you gain the reward box, like an income, let's say, which could be talents, money, okay, fair enough, simple, we've seen it before, but you have also assets. So you can have assets on elites, skirmishers and cavalry, which essentially, if you have more than your opponent, they give you +1 or +1 or +1 if you control the region, or +1 if you have the more battle strength or naval strength. So, not too many, so it's not a math game, but those +1s on the correct timing really make the difference. So I absolutely loved it. Fascinating game. I highly recommend it. Please check it out with the link in the description. This is Sparta, Struggle for Greece.